Hello, people of the internet. Welcome back to our fifth and final installment of 19th and 20th century writers, modernist writers. So far we've looked at, excuse me, we've looked at a few examples of, European writers, and then we took a look at Sherwood Anderson, who was writing in 1919, when his major work came out, looking at how much of an influence he had in the Americas, well, in North America, for subsequent writers. Now, the next individual we're going to look at is John Fante. Okay, now, in speaking of John Fante, the poet and novelist Charles Bukowski said, John Fante is my god. So that should tell you a little something about what kind of cultural cachet John Fante had for writers in the towards the latter half of the 20th century. American writers such as Bukowski and other writers. But so what makes John Fante unique was that he was an Italian American. He was born in Ohio. Came from a very, somewhat dysfunctional family. A lot of alcoholism. So for John Fante, a big part of what he does is negotiate identity. It's very much about situating himself in American culture. Living up to the standards. Trying to get the girl. Trying to be the American man. Breaking free from tradition. John Fante was also brought up in a very strict Catholic household, strict Italian Catholic household. So that was another thing that had a big influence on his work, informed his writing. But why I think that Fante is important in our discussion, because as we spoke about, Céline had, the French writer Céline, had a very pessimistic, black comedy kind of outlook towards things, very ridiculing, very patronizing, and ultimately contemptuous. And then we looked at Sherwood Anderson, the American writer who we said was really good at creating portraits of American life in a certain style, in a certain era. And so, you skip a couple generations, and you get to John Fante, which is essentially a combination of both those styles. Now, Fante was aware of Céline. I mean, Fante was writing in the 1930s, so that's some time after Céline was already, his work was known and quite well received. So Fante was definitely aware of that, and so contrasting that sense of identity, that sense of overcoming poverty and certain cultural restrictions and barriers. Fante, in contrast to that, he also incorporates Céline's sense of irreverence towards certain things. For instance, in the novel Ask the Dusk, there's actually a reference in here, by the way, at the end, which is a direct reference from a Céline novel. So if that has any indication, what kind of intertextuality was going on between all of these writers, that should probably be it. But so Ask the Dusk is the story of Arturo Bandini, which is essentially John Fante's alter ego. So Arturo Bandini is he's a writer, an aspiring writer, living in the 30s in Los Angeles. Now, another movement we see with Fante is Anderson was writing about rural life in Ohio at the turn of the century. With John Fante, he's writing about life in the great city of Los Angeles in the 1930s, early 40s. So I mean, of course, you had the economic hardship, and that obviously plays into this. So it's a story of a young man, Arturo Bandini. He's living in LA, 1930s, and he has no means. He has nothing to his name. The opening scene describes how how his body is essentially rejecting the fact that he has been sustaining himself on oranges for weeks at a time because that's the cheapest thing he can afford. So all those things are in this book, and so he finds himself in a predicament, kind of like the other protagonists that we have looked at, Celine and Hampson. We have a aspiring artist, writer who's starving, doesn't have means to improve his situation, and then at the same time, this book is also very whimsical and lighthearted and lyrical in certain ways. The language itself, it's very. I've thought of it as somewhat neo-pastoral, if you want to call it that. I mean, just the description of the city of LA, of really the sense of what it was like to be there at the time. The people, the culture, the sights and sounds and smells. I mean, he gets into that stuff. And for that reason, I mean, I call it neo-pastoral because if you look at it in the tradition of Anderson, for instance, I mean, it's very removed, but in a similar, in a different setting. It's, removed in setting, but kind of doing a similar thing if you consider it in the American novel tradition, American literature tradition. So Fonte incorporates all these things: identity, culture, class, but at the same time, he's very self-deprecating in this book, and that's kind of where it gets the strength in this book, is in his ability to write really funny comical scenes, and then at the same time switch gears to ideas of wanting to, of belonging, of desire to belong, or in this instance of this book, for Arturo Bandini, he falls in love with this waitress, Camila Lopez. She's a Mexican waitress who doesn't pay attention to him at first, and Fonte has nothing. He doesn't have anything to his name. His clothes are kind of terrible, and he looks like a shabby, starving artist. And then in the course of the novel, he has some moderate success. Like, he actually sells a story he wrote. We never get to read it, but throughout this novel, he constantly evokes the story he wrote and tells us about some of its properties, about how lyrical it is, and how funny it is, and how well balanced it is, and in many ways, it's kind of like he's talking about this book, because that's what it feels like. It is funny, it is joyous, it is spontaneous, whimsical, but at the same time, very, very deep passages, very emotional passages, very honest. And once again, that's a common theme. I think I've probably said that about every one of these books. Maybe that's just a preferential thing, the kind of stuff I like to read, or also something that is inherent in all of these writers that we've looked at. I mean, they're all innovators. They're all doing something new. They're all essentially creating legacies, and part of the way you do that in literature is by being honest, and by being revealing, and by giving insight, and all of these writers do that very well. I mean, Fonte does that kind of specifically very well in his own way, and then, more importantly, in contrast to the other writers, the 19th century writers, as a 20th century writer, like, this is definitely more relatable. If you can even go to LA, for instance, you can go to Los Angeles and visit the landmarks, visit the places where he describes the Bunker Hill, the Coldwater Flat districts, certain places. I mean, they're still all there, very different today, but that's a nice thing. I mean, you still have that kind of historical, cultural reference that's still... So, definitely more of a modern writer. And then another thing is that, like I prefaced this, Bukowski, for instance, a lot of guys got their cues from John Fonte. A lot of other American writers. I mean, Bukowski wrote the preface to this book, and I mean, Fonte. Another reason I chose is just because Fonte is very. You will never read Fonte in school. I mean, don't ask me why, but like, it just doesn't make the reading list. I've never seen it in a bookstore at school. So it's another reason. I mean, very underrated in certain ways and overlooked, and very influential, tremendously influential. But beyond that, I mean, not only was this book made into several cinematic adaptations, and Fonte was also, when he wasn't writing and selling his novels, because that wasn't always easy, he did work in Hollywood as a screenwriter. So his legacy in Hollywood, it's pretty extensive, and to this day he's still celebrated in certain parts of LA. They have retrospectives, and I think there's I don't know if it's related, but when I was in LA, I noticed there's a major highway kind of thing called Bandini Way. I don't know. I always meant to check that out, but hey, I mean, how many Bandinis could there possibly be? So, Fonte is like, in terms of just what he did for his own scene in LA, for the writers there, and bringing his own perspective on what it was like as a Italian American to move to Hollywood and all those pursuits. So what kind of happens in this novel is, like I said, he has minor success. He's chasing this girl, Camilla Lopez, who doesn't pay him any attention, and he does manage to sell and make money. But the thing with him is, he has no idea how to budget his money. I mean, in one instance, the book opens, he's practically starving. Another starving artist. He sells a story, makes a decent amount of money that would by any standards, like if managed properly, last him a long time. But he just doesn't know what he's doing. You get really frustrated, kind of like in Hampson's Hunger, the first novel we looked at. These instances of characters who do things that they shouldn't be doing, and their rationale, they're not doing it for, in all cases, it's only to their detriment. They're not doing it for any means other than just, God only knows why they do the things they do. That's probably part of the reason, because they are artists, they're writers, they are, in certain ways, kind of eccentric. And so Fonte, or Bandini in this novel, come into money, and then he'll do something like go out and spend it all on some lavish suit. That's one thing he does. And he goes out and spends practically all the money he has on a lavish suit, and then goes on to tip exuberant amounts to waitresses, literally giving his money away, much the same way as Hampson's character in Hunger. And he actually gets to, it's been said that in the novel, Camilla Lopez, the waitress that he's chasing, this woman that he becomes infatuated with, is very much, he stands in for his dream, his dream of being a writer. He wants that more than anything. And he actually gets to be with Camilla for a short period of time. And then, for whatever reason, she's kind of like this unattainable thing, this very, the second you grasp it, it slips out of your fingers. She almost doesn't, she's not a very real person, but more so an ideal that that Bandini is chasing, kind of like his aspirations. So he gets to be with her briefly, but much like anything that isn't solid, that doesn't have a firm foundation or is an idea, she kind of slips away, and eventually completely slips away. Not to ruin the end of the book or anything, because it's really a journey or a discovery that you will make. Regardless of if you can still reread this book. That's kind of the thing. Still going to be as good, if not better, like with every reading. but he gets that, and slips away, and in some ways, like, it irreconcilable loss. You don't know what it means for him as a writer. You don't really know what it means for him as a character to lose Camilla, but you get the sense that it's kind of the end of something. Now, tragically, John Fonte actually had a bit later on in life. He developed diabetes, and gradually lost all four of his limbs. He was, as Bukowski said, they chopped him up, and it actually also went blind. So by the end of his life, he was blind. I don't know if you'd call him a quadriplegic. Essentially, it was a blind torso. So not the best ending. I mean, obviously, As the Dusk is autobiographical. Like, I mean, he lived that life. He went to L.A. There's no question there. Bandini is Arturo. Bandini is Fonte. But this was before his sickness, and so, it's more just a chronicle of his struggles. Other notable works, though, which I really love by him. So you have John Fonte, The Wine of Youth. This happens to be, like, just a very nice book. I don't know, this burgundy, like, in cover here. Like, I don't know, don't ask me why, I just like this edition. So this is, selected stories, and this is essentially, Fonte's, earlier works, what it was, growing up in a small town, being Italian-American, his dysfunctional family, all the stories of his extended family, his scandalous uncles, and his many sisters, and so, this book is an account of really the aspirations and dreams and hopes of a young man, of a young writer, kind of like all these books we've looked at, in some way, and, once again, just like I said before, I say that the honesty, really, this one, it's sad honesty. I mean, it's very revealing, and John Fonte, he's kind of an anti-hero in his stories, but at the same time, he's not really. I mean, he doesn't set himself up to be anything more than he feels that he is, and in many ways, he is just this kind of Italian-American, second-generation immigrant who is trying to find his way and does face many cultural barriers, and, it wasn't easy for him, trying to be a writer, trying to balance his religious duties. There's a big part of the Catholicism is in these books as it influenced him. And then another one is Big Hunger, another collection. Beautiful, beautiful collection. Once again, these are short stories, collection. They don't have, like a continual, like a single voice kind of narrative, as As the Dusk. So we've looked at, we started off with Knut Hamsun, probably the most important writer of the 19th century, and one of the most important writers, like, of all time, for sure. We took a look at Louis Ferdinand Céline, the great French, war writer and humorist, if you want to call him that. I mean, black humor. We looked at, who else did we look? We looked at Sherman Anderson. We spoke a bit about William Saroyan and the early, American modern tradition. And then John Fonte. John Fonte is probably, the best example of kind of the end of, in a sense, the end of that tradition. I mean, it obviously carried on into Bukowski, who references all of these books. Every single one of these books that we've been over, he references and was familiar with them. So you can see, the evolution. You can see how something that started in Europe would influence something in America, and vice versa. You could see how these generational writers influenced each other. And essentially, the beautiful thing is that all of these writers were aware of all these writers that we've looked at. I mean, obviously Hampson was the first one, so he wasn't going to be aware of Fonte, but Fonte was definitely aware of Hampson, and kind of where we are today. So in the next videos, we'll be looking at just other great books, related. I think there's definitely a stylistic kind of continuity between all these books. Like if you're, if you like one of them, there's a good chance you'll like all of these authors, just because there's similarities but huge differences, obviously. But there's quality stuff. So we'll be looking at some more of my favorite writers who kind of follow in these traditions to a large extent. I mean, it's a style that just seems to shine through. I mean, in terms of protagonist and tone and voice, definitely something that's common to all of them. So we'll be looking at more books like that. I'd love to know if there are any books you would like me to look at, talk about, review. Could do more in-depth reviews of specific books. But other than that, just, as always, I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What you think of these videos, what you think of these books. For all I know, you're familiar but you don't like them. That's always interesting to me too. So, yeah guys, share, comment, all that good stuff. And until next time, I'm Mark for Montrealite. This is the 5th book club meeting. And till next time, keep reading and be good.